The auction lasted exactly 11 minutes. Not because bidders were fighting, because nobody wanted the land. Parcel 17, 63 acres, abandoned for nearly 40 years. The auctioneer read from the file. Former pasture. Heavy brush. No structures. Poor access. Sold for back taxes. Silence. He looked around the room. Do I have an opening bid? Nothing. A minute passed. Someone coughed. Another person quietly laughed. The auctioneer sighed. Any bid? Margaret Hale raised her hand. I'll take it. Several heads turned. The auctioneer blinked. Opening bid accepted. No one countered. 3 taps of the gavel later. The land was hers. Outside the courthouse, Dale Harper caught up with her. You actually bought that place? Margaret smiled. I did. He shook his head. There's nothing there. She looked toward the distant hills. We'll see. The property sat only 4 miles from the Hale Ranch. Years earlier it had supported cattle. Then the owners passed away. The heirs lived out of state. Taxes went unpaid. Fences collapsed. Brush swallowed everything. Cedar, blackberry, multiflora rose, honey locust saplings, young elm. The land slowly disappeared beneath vegetation. Nathan drove through the gate the following morning. The truck barely fit. Briars scraped both mirrors. Small cedars crowded the old ranch road. He stopped. You bought a forest. Margaret laughed. Not yet. She climbed out carrying only a map. No bulldozer. No chainsaw. No excavator. Nathan looked puzzled. That's it. She nodded. We brought the equipment yesterday. He looked around. I don't see anything. Margaret pointed toward the livestock trailer. Inside stood 120 Spanish and Kiko cross goats. Healthy. Alert. Already nibbling the trailer rails. Nathan smiled. Of course. The first pasture fence went up that afternoon. Portable electric netting divided the property into small sections. The goats rushed inside. Within minutes they ignored the grass completely. Instead they attacked blackberry vines, yum cedar, poison ivy, wild grape, everything ranchers usually fought. Margaret smiled. They know their job. The county heard immediately. Naturally. Saturday morning found the coffee shop full. Dale Harper folded his newspaper. You hear what Margaret bought. Rick looked up. What now? That brush-covered tax property. Several farmers laughed. The old Carson place? Dale nodded. She's putting goats on it. Another rancher grinned. Good. They'll disappear before the land does. More laughter. Margaret walked inside carrying mineral blocks. Dale waved. Morning. Morning. He smiled. So. She laughed. So. How's the goat logging company? They're busy. The room chuckled. You planning to clear 63 acres with goats? Margaret smiled. I think they already started. Nobody believed her. Not yet. Back on the property, the transformation began quietly. The first week barely seemed noticeable. The second week changed everything. Green leaves disappeared from thorny vines. The blackberry canes stood stripped bare. Young cedars looked like skeletons. Nathan walked yesterday's paddock. I didn't think they'd eat that. Margaret smiled. They're browsers. He picked up a stripped cedar branch. They left the grass. They prefer dessert first. Every evening the goats rotated into fresh sections. No area remained occupied long enough to damage recovering grasses. The browsing pressure stayed intense but controlled. Samuel Hale had taught Margaret rotational grazing long before it became popular. When Margaret was 14, she followed him through a neglected pasture. Brush covered nearly every corner. She pointed toward it. We'll have to clear all this. Samuel smiled. Eventually. He knelt beside a blackberry cane. Do you know why brush wins? She shrugged. Nobody cuts it. He shook his head. Because we keep removing the animals that used to eat it. She frowned. What animals? Goats. Years later those words returned. Instead of fighting nature, she decided to hire nature. The county extension grazing specialist visited in early summer. He slowly walked through the first completed paddock. Fresh grasses already appeared beneath the stripped brush. Sunlight reached soil untouched for decades. He smiled. I wasn't expecting this. Margaret folded her arms. What? I expected dead ground. Instead, native grasses emerged. Wildflowers returned. Young oak seedlings suddenly became visible. The seed bank had simply been waiting. Nathan looked amazed. So all this was underneath? The specialist nodded. The brush was hiding it. The project continued all summer. Every week another section opened. The goats worked with astonishing efficiency. They climbed fallen logs, balanced on rocks, reached vines impossible for machinery. Nothing seemed difficult. The old ranch slowly reappeared. Fence posts emerged. Stone property markers resurfaced. Even forgotten wagon trails became visible beneath years of growth. One afternoon, Nathan noticed something unusual, an almost perfectly straight line of moss-covered rocks. He called Margaret. "Come look." She knelt beside them. Hand-cut limestone blocks, too regular to be natural. She brushed away leaves. The stones continued downhill. "What do you think?" Nathan asked. Margaret smiled. "I don't know, but somebody built this." They marked the location, then continued grazing around it. Weeks later, another surprise appeared. The goats stripped dense blackberry thickets from a nearby hillside. Beneath them stood old apple trees, twisted, neglected, still alive. Nathan stared upward. "I didn't even know these were here." Margaret smiled. Neither did anyone else. Several trees still produced small apples. Wild, sharp, fragrant. The county historian visited after hearing about the orchard. He carried faded aerial photographs. Standing beneath the ancient trees, he quietly unfolded one map. This used to be the Carson homestead. Margaret looked surprised. There was a house. He nodded. Barn, smokehouse, spring house. He pointed toward another ridge. And somewhere, he paused. A stone well. Nathan looked around. "Where?" The historian smiled. "Nobody remembers." Autumn arrived. The goats had cleared nearly 40 acres. The land looked completely different. Native grasses rolled across open hillsides. The surviving apple orchard stood proudly once more. Wildlife exploded across the recovering habitat. Quail returned. Turkeys nested. Deer browsed fresh growth. Then one chilly October morning, Nathan climbed onto a ridge carrying coffee. He looked across a newly cleared valley. Something caught his eye. Not grass. Not trees. A perfect circle. Gray stone. Barely visible beneath the remaining briars. He hurried downhill. "Margaret." She reached him minutes later. He pointed toward the circle. Only the upper edge remained exposed. Carefully fitted limestone. Hand-built. She slowly brushed away fallen leaves. The opening continued downward into darkness. Cold air drifted upward. Nathan whispered, "Is that?" Margaret nodded slowly. "I think we just found the well." Neither spoke for several seconds. Then Margaret remembered the county historian's map. The old homestead. The spring house. The missing well. She looked down into the darkness. The air felt cool. Damp. Alive. Just then a truck pulled into the pasture. The county historian climbed out carrying another rolled map. He walked toward the stone circle, then stopped in his tracks. His eyes widened. He looked at Margaret, then at the ancient limestone well emerging from beneath decades of brush. Finally he smiled. "I've got a question." Margaret looked up. "Go ahead." He pointed into the cool darkness below. "Do you have any idea how old that well might actually be?" The county historian stood silently beside the stone circle. He brushed moss from the weathered limestone with careful fingers. Then he looked at Margaret. "Do you have any idea how old that well might actually be?" She shook her head. "No." He smiled. "I think it may be older than the Carson family." Nathan looked surprised. "Older?" The historian nodded. "The stones are hand-cut limestone." He studied the craftsmanship. This style was common before modern drilling equipment. He paused. It could easily be more than 150 years old. Margaret looked down into the darkness. Cool air drifted upward. The well wasn't dry. She could hear it. Faintly. Water. The historian smiled. "That's the sound you want." The next morning the county well contractor arrived. He lowered a powerful inspection light. Everyone leaned over the opening. The beam disappeared into darkness. 30 feet. 40. 50. Then, the light reflected from crystal clear water. Nathan laughed. "It's full." The contractor nodded. Nearly 20 feet of water. Margaret smiled quietly. "So it never went dry?" "No." He pointed toward the brush-covered hillside. It was simply forgotten. The first challenge wasn't using the well. It was protecting it. Decades of fallen limbs, vines, and loose stones surrounded the opening. Margaret refused to rush. The goats continued clearing carefully around the site, while workers restored the old limestone wall one stone at a time. Every block returned exactly where it originally belonged. The county historian visited almost every weekend. One afternoon he unfolded another faded map. "I found something." Margaret looked over. What? This wasn't only a well. He pointed towards several hand-drawn structures. There was once a spring house here. Nathan looked around. Where? The historian smiled. Probably under another 40 years of brush. The goats continued moving slowly across the hillside. Every rotation uncovered another surprise. An old split-rail fence. Stone foundation blocks. Rusted wagon hardware. Pieces of hand-forged hinges. The land wasn't revealing treasure. It was revealing history. Late spring brought another discovery. Nathan noticed unusually lush grass growing downhill from the restored well. Even after several rainless weeks, the strip remained green. He called Margaret. Look at this. She knelt beside the grass. The soil felt cool, almost damp. She followed the narrow green ribbon downhill. Nearly 300 yards later, it disappeared beneath another blackberry thicket. The goats reached that section the following week. Within days, the brush vanished. Underneath lay a shallow stone-lined channel. The county historian laughed when he saw it. There it is. What? The old gravity-fed water race. Nathan frowned. The what? He smiled. Before electric pumps, farmers carried water downhill using gentle stone channels. Margaret followed the line with her eyes. It stretched across the hillside toward what had once been the orchard. The old apple trees. Now it made sense. The well hadn't served only the house. It had quietly watered nearly the entire homestead. The county extension water specialist visited after hearing about the discovery. He studied the restored well, measured water depth, flow rate, recharge. Everything looked surprisingly healthy. Finally, he smiled. I've got a question. Margaret folded her arms. Go ahead. Have you pumped any water yet? She shook her head. Not 1 gallon. He looked surprised. Why? Margaret smiled. I wanted to understand it before using it. He nodded approvingly. Most people reverse that. Summer arrived with unusually dry weather. Again, neighboring pastures browned quickly. Margaret's newly cleared 63 acres stayed greener than expected. Without dense cedar and thorn thickets, rainfall actually reached the soil. Native grasses expanded rapidly. The restored orchard benefited from better sunlight. The old well quietly supplied water to a small livestock trough through a gravity-fed pipe. No electricity, no diesel pump, just elevation. Nathan watched clear water flow steadily into the trough. He laughed. The oldest system on the ranch. And the cheapest. The goats had already earned back much of their purchase cost through brush clearing alone. Now another opportunity appeared. The restored pasture carried nearly 3 times more grazing than anyone expected. Native grasses returned. Wildflowers exploded across the hillsides. Pollinators followed. Even quail nested beneath recovering bunch grasses. Dale Harper drove onto the property one evening. He stepped out without saying anything. For several minutes, he simply looked. Open pasture stretched across hills that had been hidden beneath brush only a year earlier. The old apple orchard produced its largest crop in decades. The restored limestone well stood proudly beneath a handcrafted wooden roof. Goats quietly grazed fresh browse in another paddock. Finally, Dale spoke. I would have sworn this place was ruined forever. Margaret smiled. So did everyone else. He laughed softly. I remember telling people you bought a jungle. You did. He pointed toward the well. I never imagined this was underneath. Margaret looked across the land. Neither did I. The County Conservation District organized a field day that autumn. More than 200 landowners attended. Some came to study rotational goat grazing. Others came to see the restored homestead. Most simply wanted to understand how abandoned land had recovered so quickly. Margaret led the tour herself. She stopped beside the old well. Years earlier, it had been buried beneath briars. Now native limestone glowed beneath the afternoon sun. Fresh flowers surrounded the stone wall. Clear water shimmered below. One young farmer raised his hand. What was the biggest discovery? Several visitors looked toward the well. Margaret smiled. The well wasn't. They looked surprised. She pointed toward the surrounding hills. The grass was. Silence settled over the group. The land already knew how to heal. She looked toward the browsing goats. It just needed someone to remove what was keeping the sunlight away. The audience remained quiet. Then several people nodded. Months later, the state agricultural department honored the Hale Ranch for innovative brush restoration using managed goat grazing. University students visited every spring. Researchers documented returning native plants. Bird populations increased dramatically. Soil erosion dropped. Even the old orchard continued improving. One afternoon, the county historian handed Margaret a small framed photograph. Black and white, faded around the edges. She immediately recognized the place. The same well. Only the photograph showed children filling wooden buckets beside it more than a century earlier. On the back, someone had written, "Carson Well, summer of 1894. Margaret quietly placed the photograph inside the restored spring house. It belonged there, not because it increased the property's value, because it completed its story. One cool autumn evening, she stood beside the well as the goats grazed peacefully across the recovering hillsides. She remembered auction day, the laughter, the empty bidding room. Everyone saw 63 brush-covered acres that nobody wanted. They saw thorns, cedars, blackberries, neglect. Margaret saw sunlight waiting to reach the ground again. She never expected to uncover an old stone well. She never imagined an abandoned orchard still survived beneath the vines. She simply believed healthy land is rarely lost forever. Sometimes it's only hidden beneath years of neglect. By the second autumn, the forgotten property had become one of the most productive grazing pastures on the Hale Ranch. The old well, once buried beneath briars, now quietly watered livestock every day without a single electric pump. Visitors often admired the beautiful limestone stones. Margaret always smiled. The well wasn't the greatest treasure they uncovered. The greatest treasure was discovering that the land had never stopped waiting for someone patient enough to let it breathe again.